I've spent the last 10 years pulling ghosts out of machines. People think that when they hit delete or smash a circuit board with a hammer, the information is gone. It isn't. Data is like a stain on a carpet. You can scrub all you want, but if you have the right chemicals and enough patience, you can always see the shadow of what used to be there. My shop, Bit by Bit Forensics, is tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a defunct bookstore. I don't have a neon sign. I don't need one. My clients find me through word of mouth, usually when they're desperate and the police are the last people they want to call. Nora Thorne walked into my shop on a rainy Tuesday. She looked like she'd belonged in a glass display case. Silk trench coat, perfect blonde hair pulled back in a tight knot, and a frantic energy that she was trying very hard to mask with a polite smile.
"They told me you were the best, Julian,"
She said, her voice barely a whisper. She placed a small velvet pouch on my counter.
"My husband, he's a bit clumsy. He dropped this. It contains our entire family history. 12 years of photos, videos, our children's first steps, everything."
I opened the pouch. Inside was a high-end, military-grade external SSD. It hadn't just been dropped. The aluminum casing was warped, and there were clear impact marks that suggested it had been struck with something very heavy and blunt, repeatedly. "I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Thorne," I said, checking the serial number. "But I have to be honest, this looks like intentional damage. If the flash chips are cracked, the data might be irrecoverable."
"Please."
She said, reaching across the counter to touch my hand. Her fingers were ice cold.
"Silas, he is devastated. He's an important man, and he doesn't handle loss very well. He's been so stressed lately with the merger. He'll pay whatever it takes. Just don't tell him I brought it here. He thinks it's a lost cause, and seeing it might set him off again."
She handed me a check. The amount was 3 times my monthly rent. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded and watched her walk out to a waiting black sedan. I took the drive to my clean bench. Under the microscope, the damage was even weirder. The internal controller had been bypassed. Someone had tried to fry the board with a high voltage surge, probably a taser or a modified capacitor, before smashing it. This wasn't an accident, this was a digital execution. I spent the next 4 hours under the magnifying lamp. I had to desolder the NAND flash memory chips, the tiny black rectangles where the actual data lives, and move them to a donor board. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Nora seemed terrified of her husband's stress, yet she was willing to pay a fortune to recover what he had clearly tried to destroy. By 8 p.m., I had the donor board prepped. I connected it to my air-gapped recovery station and began the imaging process. 1%, 4%. At 12%, the software flagged an anomaly. The drive wasn't just a collection of JPEGs and home movies. The first partition was a honeypot, a decoy layer filled with thousands of generic stock photos of European vacations and birthday parties. It was meant to satisfy a casual observer. But buried beneath the decoy was an encrypted volume that shouldn't have been there if it was a family drive. It was protected by a 256-bit AES encryption layer. I'm not just a recovery guy, I'm a tinkerer. I ran a brute force script against the header, and to my surprise, it popped open in minutes. The password was a date. A wedding anniversary? No. It was the date that Silas Thorne's company, Thorne Aerodynamics, went public. I opened the first recovered file. It wasn't a photo of a child. It was a scanned PDF of a private ledger. I scrolled through the first few pages, my brow furrowing. The numbers were astronomical. It looked like a secondary set of books. Millions of dollars in research and development being funneled into an offshore account called the Icarus Fund. I clicked on the next folder, titled Eric, Correspondence. Eric was the CFO of Thorne Aerodynamics. I remembered his face from the news. He'd resigned 3 weeks ago to pursue personal interests and hadn't been seen since. The emails in the folder weren't about resignation, they were about blackmail.
"Silas, I can't keep the auditors away forever. The Icarus Fund is a hole we can't fill. If you don't authorize the transfer by Friday, I'm going to the board.
The last email was sent the night Eric disappeared. The reply from Silas was a single sentence.
Let's discuss this at the lake house. I've found a way to bridge the gap.
I sat back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my glasses. I looked at the warped, smashed casing of the drive sitting on my bench. I wasn't looking at a family's memories. I was looking at the motive for a disappearance. And Nora Thorne hadn't brought me this drive to save her history. She had brought it to me because she knew exactly what her husband had done, and she wanted the one thing Silas thought he had destroyed. Then, the bell above my shop door chimed. I hadn't locked it. I looked at the security feed. It wasn't Nora. It was a man in a charcoal suit, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face I'd seen on the cover of Forbes. Silas Thorne was standing in my lobby, his eyes scanning the room with the cold precision of a predator. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I sat in the glow of the monitor, watching the security feed as Silas Thorne took a slow, deliberate step into the center of my lobby. He didn't look like a man whose stress was getting the better of him. He looked like a man who owned the air he was breathing. I quickly reached over and flipped the switch on my secondary monitor, the one displaying their Icarus Fund ledger. The screen went black, leaving only the primary display showing a progress bar and a generic folder of European vacation photos I'd pulled from the drive's decoy partition. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I stood up and walked through the bead curtain that separated my lab from the front desk. Silas turned. Up close, he was even more imposing. He had the kind of expensive tan that suggested he spent his winters in places I couldn't even afford to Google. His eyes were the color of flint, and they didn't miss a single detail. The grease on my chin, the solder on my hands, and the nervous twitch in my left eyelid.
Julian, I presume,
he said. It wasn't a question.
My wife mentioned she might stop by. She has a sentimental streak that often leads her to waste the time of professionals.
He leaned against my counter, his presence taking up every inch of the small room. He looked at the velvet pouch sitting next to the cash register.
She brought you the drive,
he said. It was a flat statement. She did, I replied, leaning back against the doorframe to keep my distance. She's very concerned about her family photos. 10 years of memories is a lot to lose to a flight of stairs. Silas let out a short, dry chuckle.
A flight of stairs? Is that what she told you? Nora always did have a flair for the dramatic. The truth is much more mundane. I threw it against a wall during a disagreement. High-stake business tends to bleed into one's personal life, wouldn't you agree?
He reached out and tapped the velvet pouch with a manicured finger.
Tell me, Julian, is it a lost cause? I'd hate for her to keep building up her hopes if the hardware is truly fried.
It's in bad shape, I said, choosing my words with the care of a man walking through a minefield. The controller board was scorched. I've had to desolder the NAND chips and move them to a donor. I'm currently imaging the first partition. I gestured toward the lab. So far, I'm seeing a lot of corrupted JPEGs. Birthdays, some beach photos. It's a slow process. Silas' eyes narrowed. He was looking for a tell. A flicker of hesitation that would let him know I'd seen the Icarus files. I kept my face as blank as a fresh hard drive.
Corrupted JPEGs,
Silas repeated.
Well, that's a shame. If that's all that's left, perhaps we should just call it a day. I'm willing to pay for your time, of course. Double whatever Nora promised you. If you'll just hand over the chips and the donor board now. I'll take them to my corporate security team. They're more equipped for this kind of salvage.
I'm almost done with the image, I said, feeling the weight of the check Nora had given me in my pocket. I'd hate to give up when I'm this close. And as a professional, I have a policy. The only person who signs the intake form is the one who can authorize the release of the hardware. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Silas straightened up, his shoulders squaring. The polished CEO facade didn't slip, but something darker peeked out from behind it.
Nora's my wife, Julian. Her signatures and mine are effectively the same.
In a courtroom, maybe, I said. In this shop, they aren't. If you want the drive, I need Nora to call me. Silas stared at me for a long beat. The silence was punctuated only by the hum of the server in the back room. I wondered if he could hear my heart hammering against my ribs. Then, he reached into his charcoal coat and pulled out a slim, gold-cased smartphone.
She's in the car,
He said. He tapped the screen and held the phone toward me. The call connected.
Julian?
Nora's voice came through the speaker. She sounded small, distant, and, if I wasn't imagining it, terrified.
Silas told me he was stopping by. It's okay. You can give him the drive. I was being silly. It's just photos, right?
There was a subtext in her voice that screamed, "Don't listen to me." "Are you sure, Mrs. Thorne?" I asked. "I think I might be able to get everything back. Even the files you specifically mentioned were important to you." A sharp intake of breath on the other hand.
No.
She said quickly.
No, Silas is right. Just give it to him, please.
Silas took the phone back and ended the call. He looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes.
You heard the lady. Hand it over, Julian. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be.
I turned and walked back into the lab. Silas followed me, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. I picked up the donor board, but as I did, my eyes flickered to the secondary monitor I'd turned off. I hadn't just recovered the Icarus files. While we were talking, the recovery software had finished the final sector of the drive. A new folder had popped up on the desktop of my workstation. It was a video file. The thumbnail showed a grainy, low-light image of a basement, the Thorns Lake House, and in the center of the frame, Eric, the CFO, was tied to a chair. Silas was standing right behind me. He couldn't see the monitor from this angle yet, but he was moving closer.
Just the board and the chips, Julian,
he said softly. I looked at the video file. I looked at the man who was likely a murderer standing 3 feet away. And then I looked at my delete key, but I didn't press it. Instead, I reached for a spare USB drive on my desk and surreptitiously bumped the copy command with my thumb. "Here," I said, turning around and handing him the donor board. "It's all yours." Silas took the hardware, his fingers brushing mine. They were as cold as Nora's. He didn't say thank you. He just turned and walked out of the shop. I waited until I heard his car pull away before I sat back down. I opened the video file. It wasn't just a video of a kidnapping. It was a video of Nora. She wasn't the victim I thought she was. In the footage, she was standing over Eric, holding a heavy metal lamp. Silas was in the background, but he wasn't the one doing the shouting.
Where are the keys, Eric?
Nora's voice on the recording was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of the fragility she'd shown me.
Silas might be a coward, but I'm not. Give me the access codes to the Icarus Fund, or you aren't leaving this basement.
I realized then that Nora hadn't brought me the drive to frame her husband. She had brought it to me because she had been the one to smash it in a rage after Eric died, and she realized too late that she destroyed the only record of the offshore accounts she needed to disappear. I wasn't caught between a victim and a predator. I was caught between two monsters who were currently fighting over the same bone. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Nora.
He's gone. Meet me at the dry cleaners next door in 5 minutes. Don't let him see you.
The neon sign of the dry cleaners next door flickered, casting a rhythmic, sickly purple glow over the sidewalk. I stood in the shadows of the alleyway, the cold rain soaking through my shirt. In my pocket, the USB drive felt like a live wire, pulsing with the footage of Nora Thorne, the fragile wife, beating a man for bank codes. The back door of the cleaners creaked open. Nora stepped out, her silk trench coat dark with rain. She didn't look like a porcelain doll anymore. Her hair was coming loose from its knot, and her eyes were wide, scanning the street with a frantic, jagged energy.
Did you give it to him?
She hissed, grabbing my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I gave him the hardware, I said, keeping my voice low. Just like you told me to on the phone.
Good, good.
She let out a shaky breath, her eyes darting to my shop.
He's going to take it to his tech team at the office. They'll see the decoy partition and the corruption, and he'll think the data is gone for good. He'll think it's safe.
Is that why you brought it to me, Nora? Because you knew I'd find the other layer? The one Silas didn't know about? She froze. The facade of the desperate wife didn't just slip. It evaporated. She let go of my arm and smoothed out her coat, her expression settling into something cold and predatory.
Silas is a blunt instrument,
She said, her voice now steady and sharp.
He thought smashing the drive was enough to protect him. He doesn't realize that in our world, the only thing more valuable than money is the proof of how you got it. I need those Icarus codes, Julian. Eric died before he gave them up, but he kept a digital backup on that drive. I know he did.
I saw the video, Nora, I said. The silence that followed was heavy. A car drove by on the main street, its headlights momentarily illuminating the dark alley. Nora didn't flinch.
Then you know Silas is a liability,
She said calmly.
He panicked. He wanted to give Eric a payout and let him go. But I knew Eric would talk at the moment he hit the pavement. I did what was necessary to protect our interests. Now, give me the codes and you can walk away with enough money to close that pathetic little shop and never look at a broken screen again.
And if I don't? Nora stepped closer. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating in the small space.
Julian, you're a smart man. You've seen how we handle people who become obstacles. My husband thinks the drive is dead. If you give me the backup now, Silas never has to know you exist. But if you try to play hero, well, Silas has a very short temper and a very long reach.
I looked at her, then at the black sedan idling at the end of the block. I realized Silas wasn't just in the car. He was waiting for her to finish the transaction. They weren't just two monsters fighting over a bone. They were a team, and I was the loose end. I don't have the codes on me, I lied. The encryption was deeper than I thought. I was mid-transfer when Silas walked in, the data still sitting on my air-gapped server back in the lab. Nora's eyes narrowed. She was calculating, weighing the risk of letting me go back inside.
Fine. We go back in. Together. You finish the transfer to a drive for me, and then we delete the server logs. Permanently.
We walked back to bit-by-bit forensics. The air in the shop felt stale, charged with the ghost of the data I'd just uncovered. I sat down at my workstation, Nora standing directly behind me, her hand resting on the back of my chair. It felt like a threat. I pulled up the recovery software. The progress bar for the Icarus files was sitting at 100%. There, I said, pointing to the screen. That's the encrypted volume. But there's a problem. It's a dual key system. It needs a physical token to unlock the final layer. Eric must have had a USB dongle or a biometric key.
He didn't have anything on him.
Nora snapped.
Search the subdirectories. There has to be a bypass.
I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. I wasn't looking for a bypass. I was looking for the security feed. Silas was no longer in the car. On the small monitor in the corner of my eye, I saw him walking toward the front door of the shop. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was holding a heavy, black object in his hand. It looked like a tactical taser, probably the same kind he used to fry the drive. Nora, I whispered, your husband is coming in, and I don't think he's here to help you with the codes. Nora spun around, her face pale.
What? No. He's supposed to stay in the car. We had an agreement.
I don't think Silas likes agreements where he isn't the one holding the keys, I said. The front door chimed. Silas stepped into the lobby, his charcoal coat dripping water onto the floor. He looked from Nora to me, then at the monitor displaying the Icarus folders.
You always were too greedy, Nora.
Silas said, his voice a low, rumbling thunder.
I told you to let the drive stay dead. I told you we could survive the audit if we just played the victim. But you couldn't leave it alone. You just had to go looking for the ghosts.
Silas, put that away.
Nora said, her voice trembling.
Julian is almost through. We can have the money. We can leave tonight.
I don't want the money anymore, Nora.
Silas said, stepping through the bead curtain.
I want the silence. And between the two of you, there's far too much noise in this room.
I looked at the delete key on my keyboard. Then, I looked at the broadcast icon on my secondary terminal. The one linked to the cloud backup I'd set up for my high-profile police consultations. One key would save my life in the short term. The other would end theirs forever. Wait, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Silas, you don't have to do this. I've already sent the video to a remote server. If my heart rate monitor, linked to my watch, goes flat, or the shop power is cut, the footage of the lake house goes live to DA's office. It was the oldest bluff in the book, but in a room full of people who lived by the code of data is forever, it was the only one that truly mattered. Silas paused, his eyes flicking to the smartwatch on my wrist.
You're lying.
Nora hissed.
He's a small-time tech guy. He wouldn't have that kind of setup.
Check the outgoing traffic on the router, Silas, I said, pointing to the blinking lights on the modem. Go ahead. Look at the packet stream. As Silas turned his head to look at the router, I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for the power strip under my desk. I kicked it. The shop plunged into total darkness. The darkness in the shop was thick, smelling of ozone and old solder. I didn't wait for my eyes to adjust. I knew every inch of this floor, where the loose linoleum was, where the corner of the server rack protruded, and where I kept the heavy-duty fire extinguisher. I could hear Silas roaring in frustration, the crackle of the tactical taser blooming in the dark like a jagged blue spark. He was swinging blindly. Nora screamed, a sound of pure sharp panic that was cut short by the heavy bang of a body hitting my workbench. I rolled to the left, my hand finding the cold metal of the extinguisher. I didn't discharge it. I used the weight of it, swinging low at where I'd last seen Silas's silhouette. The metal connected with something solid, a knee, and Silas went down with a grunt of pain.
Julian,
He hissed, his voice ragged.
you think you're clever? You're a dead man either way. If that video goes out, you're an accomplice. You took the money. You withheld evidence.
I didn't take the money, Silas, I whispered, moving toward the back exit. I just took the data. I reached the breaker box near the rear door and flipped the toggle for the emergency lights. The shop was suddenly bathed in a dim, pulsing red glow. Silas was on the floor, clutching his leg, the taser lying a few feet away. Nora was slumped against the bench, her face pale, a trickle of blood running from her temple where she'd struck the edge of the monitor. She was conscious, but dazed. I stood by the door, the USB drive clutched in my hand. The bluff was half true, I said, looking at Silas. I didn't have a heart rate trigger. But the broadcast? That's real. I didn't send it to the DA. I sent it to your board of directors. All 50 of them, along with the offshore ledger. Silas's face didn't just go pale. It seemed to age 10 years in a second. He knew the math. The DA could be fought by expensive lawyers and years of appeals. But the board? They would freeze his assets within an hour to save their own skins. He was no longer a titan. He was an infection they were already cutting out.
You've destroyed everything.
Nora rasped, her eyes finally focusing on me.
You've killed us.
No, I said, opening the back door to the cold, cleansing rain. I just recovered what was lost. That's what you hired me for, isn't it? I didn't wait for the police. I knew Silas had his own cleaners, and I didn't want to be there when they realized there was nothing left to clean. I vanished into the alleyway, the red pulse of my shop fading behind me. 6 months later. I didn't go back to bit-by-bit forensics. The shop was a crime scene for a month, then a ghost story. Silas and Nora Thorne were all over the news for a while, the power couple of crime, until the trial moved back to the pages and the assets were liquidated. I moved to a different city. I don't have a shop anymore. I work out of a high security loft, and my clients are much more vetted. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset over the skyline, when my laptop chimed. It was an encrypted message through a secure portal I only used for one person.
The Icarus Fund had a secondary failsafe.
The message read. No name, but I knew the syntax. It was Nora. She had somehow avoided the heaviest charges, or maybe she traded Silas for a plea deal.
There's still 12 million sitting in a dormant account in the Caymans. I need a specialist to bypass the biometric lock. Half is yours.
Attached to the message was a file, a high-resolution scan of a thumbprint. Her thumbprint. I looked at the file. I could do it. I could reconstruct the print, build the bypass, and be a multimillionaire by morning. I thought about the smell of that rainy alleyway. I thought about the look on Eric's face in that basement video. Then, I highlighted the message and the file. I didn't hit delete. I hit forward. I sent it to the lead investigator on the Thorn case with a single note. Found another ghost for you. I closed my laptop and took a sip of my coffee. In my business, people are always trying to recover the past. But me? I've learned that the most important data you can have is a clean slate.